omnibus bill that included Ukraine aid. Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, one of those lawmakers, called out, who we had on the show yesterday morning, took offense to the tweet. Here is some of the lengthy exchange you had with him on the Senate floor yesterday.
Republicans very often are not willing to cast their vote in a way that is aligned with their voice. I see a fundamental inconsistency in criticizing an administration for not doing enough, but then not being willing to cast a vote to get aid to the people of Ukraine.
So let me just see if I understand what you just said. So 0.8% of the bill that was passed in the middle of the night last week is about Ukrainian aid. Do you believe that the people who voted against it because they were against Ukrainian aid? I think you know that not a person who voted against it, the Omni, voted against it because of the Ukrainian aid. So I think it's a dishonest argument. But the real thing we're talking about is grandstanding, because there's not a person on earth who's persuaded by that kind of tweet. You didn't move anybody. You're doing fan service for a subset of people who like Chris Murphy. I get why some people would like things that you stand for and advocate for. I get it. But there's not a person who disagreed with you who's moved because of a tweet like that. There's not an uninformed American who became informed. But there is a subset of the people who already like you that you got to grandstand for. That's all that happened with that tweet. The Republic got dumber because of that tweet. Nobody learned anything.
Despite, actually I think he lifted that line from Old School. But despite that fact, the conversation ended cordially. You all both understood you were on the same side. I do want to ask, though, you feel free to respond, obviously, to the senator here if you wish. But also, though, Mika and I were talking earlier this morning about how concerned we were about a few Republicans in the Senate, especially, whose names we're not going to mention, because we don't want to dignify what they're saying, who seem to be trying to push Joe Biden into World War III and suggesting if he doesn't take steps that trigger World War III, that somehow he's weak and he's responsible for Vladimir Putin's invasion.
Well, I mean, listen, Senator Sasse believes that he should be immune from criticism for voting against Ukraine aid on the floor of the Senate. I take him at his word. He supported that provision of the bill. But there were plenty of provisions of that budget that I disagreed with. I just thought that the aid to Ukraine was so important that I set aside my reservations about other parts of that budget, and I cast a yes vote. Senator Sasse made a different decision. He did not think that the provisions for Ukraine were substantial enough to overcome his objections to other parts of the budget, and he voted no. And had the majority of senators taken his position, Ukraine would not have the aid that we are sending them right now. People would be dying. And I'm sorry, but that is a legitimate criticism to make of Republicans. And as to the idea that I wasn't moving the American public with that tweet, well, Senator Sasse was at a press conference the day before in which Ted Cruz said that Joe Biden alone was responsible for the invasion of Ukraine. How is that press conference that he attended legitimate political dialogue, but my criticism of Republicans for voting against Ukraine aid political hackery? It's a double standard that I don't think we should accept, because we need a coalition of Republicans and Democrats on the floor of the Senate who are not just willing to speak in favor of Ukraine aid, but are actually willing to vote in favor of Ukraine aid, because this won't be the end. We will again later this year have to supply more weapons, more humanitarian aid, and we're going to need Republican support with their votes.
Yeah. So you know what? Because we're starting to mention Republican senators and a couple are getting into the mix, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you that Meek and I were. It was Rick Scott who Meek and I were disgusted by last night. His words suggesting that Joe Biden has no heart for the people that are dying over there if he doesn't implement a no-fly zone that no military man or woman, no diplomat thinks is a safe thing to do right now. But I'm just curious what you think about people like Rick Scott that are out there saying that Joe Biden is responsible for Vladimir Putin killing people, that the American, I mean, this reminds me of Republicans in every single poll I read before this invasion that said they they had a higher approval rating for Vladimir Putin than Joe Biden. How do these people come to these conclusions?
I mean, it speaks to a larger infection in the Republican Party today, where power and the accumulation of power matters more than the peaceful transition of power. We saw that on January 6th in the aftermath, and winning wars overseas. I still think that infection hasn't grown to the point where the entire Republican Party has the disease. And Senator Sasse, to his credit, at the end of our exchange yesterday, criticized some of his fellow Republicans for those kind of over-the-top comments. But Senator Scott and Senator Cruz and Senator Hawley, they've been down on the Senate floor all year blocking President Biden's national security nominees. The very people that will help Wendy Sherman implement a policy to protect Ukraine aren't in jobs today because a small subset of Senate Republicans, not Senator Sasse, but Senator Scott and Senator Cruz and others, have stopped those people from getting on the job, which makes their criticism of President Biden even hollower.